Everyone, please take your seats. We're joined by some really, really great panelists and a great moderator. So we're going to get started with the next session. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce Paco Nathan, who'll be the moderator for this panel on open source, community, startups, VC, entrepreneurship, capitalism, hypercapitalism, and the end of the world. We didn't put that, it was too long to put that in the title slide. But anyway,
no crypto.
No crypto. No, if anyone says NFT, then green slime dumps on you. So Paco is OG open source guy. So Paco, he is the managing partner at Derwin, where they do large-scale AI projects, integration of large-scale AI projects in manufacturing. He is an amplifier. He's a partner at Amplify Partners. He is the lead committer on KGgraph and PyText.
That'll work.
Okay, and then also he was the community lead for Spark at Databricks. All right, so Paco Nathan, take it away. Also, he's a longtime Austinite, right?
Yeah.
He was here a long time as well. So welcome back to Austin, Paco. Take it away.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, it's great to be back in Austin. I've been gone for a while, but I lived here for about 20 years. So if you were around here in the 80s and 90s, we may have had some overlap then. I'm really grateful to be here with our panel. I'd like to introduce Tareef, Kawaf, who's president of our studio.
Yes.
And PBC. What's PBC?
Public Benefit Corporation.
Oh, right. Okay, fantastic. Also, good friend. Carol Welling is VP of Engineering at Notable.
Hi, everybody. Great to see everyone here.
And Matthew Rocklin, CEO of Coiled and initiator of Dask.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, fantastic. So we're looking at this intersection of open source and VCs, so open source and capitalism. And I definitely have questions. Even after a number of years, I still have questions, and it seems like the questions are piling up. You know, out of the blurb on the agenda, over the last 10 years, open source adoption has grown exponentially. I'd like to unpack that a little bit. Even with the most restrictive of enterprise environments, we're still seeing all this open source adoption. Definitely would like to dig in there a bit. Despite that, there's still issues of maintainer burnout, community health, other things that just really haven't been fundamentally resolved. So first question I'd like to go down the line is, okay, we're talking about a recent influx of VC capital. Does it help or hurt? Actually, is this like a second wave or a third wave of VC capital into open source too? So I'd like to get for everybody, your perspectives on like where are we historically about capitalism in open source, and does it help or hurt?
Is it me first?
Yeah.
I'm just not sure who's going first. I think
interrupt
this
each
is
other, right?
probably, yeah. I suspect you will be interrupting me. So I think this is wave 3. I don't know how you count these waves exactly, but it feels like it's wave 3. And I think overall, it's a good thing for money to flow in because it allows you to hire engineers full-time to work on something that they otherwise would be spending nights and weekends on, right? We talked about, you know, in the previous panel, they were talking about how a lot of open source projects are built off of, you know, PhD students, you know, working and then sort of contributing in the carbonization, you know, Peter's failed analogy earlier. But so I think it's good in the sense that it gives you capital that allows you to invest in it. But the area that I worry about, and JJ and I both have been worrying about for pretty much forever, is how do you sustain that long term, right? And I think, you know, that is the if you can get the community and you can get enough people in, then life is easier. But there are plenty of projects that only have a single maintainer, right? And how do you create that next generation of talent that's able to hop in and do the work, and what can you sort of simplify for them? But it is a double-edged sword, as you know. Once you take money, you're playing a game that is that usually has one of few outcomes. You know, you die is the most typical outcome. You get bought, that would be the next most typical outcome. Yeah. And in some cases you can go public, but that's a very rare thing.
Well, I think we're probably on wave 5, but that might be just because I'm older than everyone else. And I've also been involved in startups pre-internet. and things around Unix, even before open source was quote unquote born. Right. And I think the one thing that has been consistent all the way through is change and the need to adapt. And I think, I've spoken a lot about the economics of open source and governance. And I think there is like this natural tension between business, government, and academia and research. And I think each of them bring their own special sauce to the table, if you will. And I think they're necessary. But when one overwhelms the other, then things get out of balance. And I think one of the things that's really special about the people in this room and this community is the ability to set vision, to ask, why are we doing this? And to really chart a course towards how we impact people with what we do. Because businesses are going to optimize for the bottom line, government for being reelected. Yeah. And I think the people in this room are really on the leading edge of where we're going.
So I guess 2 questions is, what wave are we on? I have no idea. This is my first wave. But it's an okay wave. Help or hurt? Yes, I think is the answer, right? And it's kind of what we make of it, I would suggest. You said there's a good tension between these things. There'll also be a lot of strong overlap. Like, right now, I think that a lot of the needs of open source actually aligns very well with the needs of venture capital, with businesses. I think that in many cases, we need companies to present open source projects to other companies. We need some mechanism there. There's many ways to achieve that. I think right now, the hip new thing in venture capital to do cloud SaaS products. And we kind of all actually kind of agree in cloud. That's a nice, cool thing. We could get taken away by that. We could get distracted by that, but we could also embrace it and find some way to make it work with us. I think the best analogy I've found here is if you're in the water. I'm in boats a lot of the time. If you're rowing a boat, it's fun. You get to go whatever direction you want to go in, but it's really tiring. If you erect a sail, you go in the direction the wind is going. And that can be really fast and really easy, but also not in the right direction. If you have a sail and a keel, and like a rudder, you get to redirect that wind a bit. That requires some creativity. I think it's all on all of us to figure out how to build that rudder and leverage the sails of capital to go in the direction that we want to take them. And that's tricky, but we can do that. We are smart people.
What happens when the boat keels over or like you fall off the boat?
You get off the boat, some other boat comes by, you jump on that boat instead. We can de-risk ourselves as well.
That's open source in a nutshell, right?
I'm okay with that.
Life wrap. Well, you're mentioning about SaaS models. Like, were you saying about that as far as like VCs pushing startups toward that kind of thing as a business model?
Yeah.
So I'm in manufacturing, primarily in Europe, and the thing is, we can't use SaaS. We can't even use managed hosting. So we're really struggling to find partner companies that can deal with something that's more familiar in the US with, say, like DoD, where you build it, you throw it over the wall to another team. The other team are the corporate badge DevOps, and they can take it and run with it. But like, our team never gets to see the data of what we're actually working with. So we're struggling to see who can really adapt to this kind of tension, which really has a lot more to do with geopolitics and companies being attacked and cyber attacks perpetually and all the rest.
It sounds like the winds are different where you are. We should erect different sails and different rudders, and that's great. Yeah. VC is not the only answer, right? There's lots of mechanisms. Engaging with government is a great way to get funding. Engaging with other large companies is a great way to get funding.
Yeah, actually, DoD now has, I think it's called MOSA. There's the new directive to encourage open source on any new proposals coming in.
Every department in government today has some proposal, some thing trying to engage open source. We are very cool right now, and that's very cool. The winds are strong.
Well, I have a question. Okay, so if we're at wave 3 or wave 5, actually, really great point about Unix. I'm an old Bell Labs person, so I appreciate that. So if we're this far out, is the money getting smarter about open source, and is open source getting smarter about the capital? And do you have any major pain points that you can point to from history, where lessons learned about that? Carol, you
You
got.
want me to take this?
I think you're going to cover history for us.
No, I'm not. Well, I could cover history, but it would be a long night or afternoon. I think VCs have always been there. They're more prominent now in terms of their visibility, and like anything else, they're human. So they are putting their faith in companies, often several, in the hopes that one of them will deliver big. And so as a business leader, it's incumbent on you to understand when to push back against the VCs, when to take their experience and advice, and really stay focused on what your mission is, what you're trying to achieve. And your point about Europe, a lot of things are more premise based. As we look at data and privacy and how we use data, SaaS will get us some things, premise will get us other things. And I think we're still figuring it all out. And I think, I want to be on the forefront of figuring it out as opposed to having somebody else dictate these important decisions for us. I don't know if Tareef, you have more thoughts.
Yeah, no, I do think that the VCs have gotten smarter and smarter about like what is it that you're doing and how what's your plan and how does that work and what's your adoption and all that kind of fun stuff. So I think that I feels like they bring more value today than they did say 9 or 10 years ago, right? I also think that there's a lot more knowledge on the open source, founder side about who should I be working with, right? There's so much money out there. The money's not the issue. Yeah. You have to find they call it the smart money, right? Or the people that you can trust to go into it with and people who understand the vision that you have for the company that you're trying to build. So to touch on your on-prem versus SaaS thing, for us at our studio, we've for the last 9 years have been selling on-prem software. Yeah. Right, and the reason for that is because we have so many customers, and that started changing a little bit with 2020 with the pandemic, where more people are like, okay, you know what, we are going to look at VPCs, we are going to look at sort of running things, but they're still going to run it themselves in a lot of cases. Now, we also have a hedge bet, where we run a SaaS offering for mostly small, medium businesses, but we're sort of continuing to invest in that area. I think there's a really interesting problem to think about with cloud providers, and I appreciate Matt's, Matt and I have slightly different views on the world.
I also feel like I put us on the wrong path by mentioning.
No, I'm just teasing you.
It's a reality of the moment, though.
I was going to bring it up.
But I think it's interesting because we're getting to a world where let's say just take an example of like AWS with SageMaker or Microsoft with Azure ML or Google with Vertex or whatever, where they have unique proprietary IP that they also want to be able to leverage the Python and the R community and have them come and use it. And so there's a world where they're like, we don't really care about charging for software, right? And we are going to charge on the compute, and we are not going to share that compute revenue with you, a startup company, right? Because that's so I worry about that as a dynamic. Maybe you've been more successful.
So as a company owner, I absolutely worry about that. As an open source maintainer, I think that's fantastic.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, from an open that's the way the winds are blowing. The clouds are going to take Dask or Spark or RStudio, and they're going to put it on the cloud. Great. What's next? As we solve that problem, what else can we do? How can we push the ball forward after that's done? Yeah. Right.
Well, to your point, I was going to ask about SaaS. The thing that we're hearing more is the buzzword is cloud premise, and it's like really large corporates. Their security teams are going in and working with Microsoft, working with AWS to change what can or can't be done within their perimeter in the cloud. So, like for instance, we use a lot of Dask. There's no way that we could use Dask provided by Microsoft. We have to do that ourselves, and there are a lot of really good security reasons for that.
That's fine.
But I also think, there's what you're trying to do and what it runs on and how it runs. And I think, as far back as I can remember, I mean, we joked at the beginning of cloud computing as it was mainframe in the cloud. And, we went through different eras of distributed computing and things like that. And I think what this is just a natural evolution of the fact that we have different tools available to us today. I mean, AI was around when I was in grad school. We just didn't have the compute power to do it.
Right, and now if you want to set up a pipeline to do something really interesting with deep learning, you're using open source. In fact, all of your
Absolutely.
absolutely pointed toward it. So, another question that came up, something that was on the list, but definitely near and dear to my heart. As far as security and supply chain, how much of your time is really devoted to security issues for the kinds of organizations that you're in, vis-a-vis open source? Kind of a weird question, but I want to throw that out because I think security has just been silent. It's like almost like a tsunami. It's just been like raising up and up. We're seeing so much more of our time spent there.
I mean, as somebody who sat on Python steering council for a number of years and as a core developer, a lot, security is hugely important. And the thing about security is it's hard to measure what good security is, but it's really obvious when the security is bad. And so, sometimes it's top of mind, sometimes it's less so, but it's always there. And as you let more people into the atmosphere of your products, you have to be conscious of security because your customers are.
I'll push back. So, Coiled is 1,000,000,000% more secure than open source Dask in lots of ways. It is not what users are complaining about the most. It is not what is most pressing in our experience of users' minds. Now, for a giant bank, for someone else, yes, but they're never going to use our software, right? I think there's actually far better gains to be made in accessibility, right? Can people use the thing at all? Okay, great. They've been using it in a totally insecure way inside their organization for the last couple of years. Oh, you do TLS security? Fantastic, right? The very basic stuff is novel to them. It's not what's pushing them. I think we should absolutely care about security. In my experience, it's actually not the primary driver or the first thing that we can have impact on.
I think
Jupyter might be a different place.
I think it depends. I think it depends a little bit on security. Is such a big field.
It is, yeah.
And it's so hard to unpack exactly which element of it you're sort of referring to. But there are worries to have about where am I getting those packages from, right, or libraries from, right, and who's touching them, and how do I know that they're good, and sort of what kind of workflow is there in the organization that I should have to protect myself against that. And so we're very upfront with customers. We're not going to guarantee what is in all of CRAN and all of PyPI. That's just not something that we can do. We can't afford. You're going to have to you're going to have to look at it, or you're going to have to buy products maybe from Anaconda or Artifactory claims to have something you will. I'm not making any. I'm not. Yeah. But my only point is that universe that is a problem, right? Because they're hey, how do I know that I didn't just bring something in that's there've been a few cases where somebody's modified a library, put it up, people download it, and it's sending keys, from AWS.
So many billions of dollars of IP are sucked out of US to China every year.
Right.
Cybersecurity is a huge problem.
It's a disaster, right?
I'm just saying it's not what I see as being the primary mover, the primary pain point that people have.
I don't disagree with you. So I'm saying that there are some people that really care about that. Certainly in our products, we have a security team now that we didn't have, say, 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
We worry about, okay, great, are we doing the right kinds of things as we're developing the software? We're hiring professional software engineers, but security is something that you always have to be, and it's good to have somebody from the outside testing and validating that you're doing the right things.
I mean, I'm really pushing on the security part, and I'm sure that's a topic for another panel, but this is the problem when you're selling an enterprise. This is the pain point of a startup getting into.
I agree with Matt that it's not actually
Really?
That is not the thing that sticks for us, right?
I've got a small story here, which might speak more to the open source crowd on this topic. So I was talking to NASA, and they were asking us, what's the right hosted Jupyter thing that this is pretty notable. This is 5-6 years ago.
That's okay.
And they were like, oh, should we use Anaconda Enterprise? Should we use Domino? Should we use that Haiku? And I was like, you do all those things, but actually Jupyter Hub is what I use. I apologize, Peter.
It is what I use as well.
Just use Jupyter Hub. And they said, well, that's great, but like we need to buy it from somebody. Like I can't use just the free open source thing. I've got to buy the software from a company that's going to sell it to me.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the thing where I think the open source community can learn from business, is that your software actually only goes so far into an organization before it has to be sold.
Okay.
Or there has to be a contract, or there has to be someone they can sue.
Yeah.
And that's where I think this sort of intersection of open source companies actually provide a lot of value back to the open source community.
Interesting.
That's a necessary component. Part of that is security. I think security is a small part of a much broader topic there of just
Accountability.
Can I sue you? Can I get support? Is a thing that I know how to procure inside of my company.
Yeah.
And that I think is a very important topic for open source as it engages with the large corporate world.
And I think that's something that Travis and Peter, over the years, I can remember probably a decade ago, Peter and I having the ongoing debate every 6 months, okay, how do we benefit open source and get these companies to pay for it, because they need to pay somebody, and make that beneficial for our community. And I'm not sure we still have the answer, but I know we have part of the solution because we are doing it. But, I think the thing with security is it does impede innovation and the ability to move quickly. So I agree with you. If you have Jupyter Hub running behind a secured environment, it's enough. So it's also, how sophisticated are the enterprise customers to really understand what is really out there? And that varies across the board.
It's probably enough for NASA. It might not be enough for the DoD, but I'm cool with that, right? I want to support NASA. I want Jupyter Hub in NASA. How do we make that happen?
Yeah. Another question I have for the panel. The last N conversations that I've had being involved with open source companies where they're looking at taking funding, one of the first questions that comes up is about patents and IP. And my experience in Europe is it's entirely different. I mean, I would find that somewhat abhorrent in the US. I just would run from the conversation. In Europe, it's actually something that's desirable for other reasons because patents are so different between the two continents. I'm curious, where are you at about software patents? Are you running into this, or is this?
Yeah, so we haven't filed for a single software patent.
Okay.
Just like we're putting the IP out there, and that's the mission of the organization. So we're like, that's, sometimes some VCs may have an issue with that, but we're like, yeah, this is who we are. This is what you're signing up for.
What's the hard part of open source then that companies are providing? I guess this goes back to the previous answers, but I mean, if there's not intellectual property, what do the VCs latch onto as the value?
Yeah, so we do something that's it's considered really, it's like the 3 waves of monetization of open source. We're like stuck in number 2 and everybody's on number 3 on like SaaS. But in our world, we sell commercial products that are not open source. They're built on the open source. And you can, your code, everything that's relating to the individual data scientist productivity is freely available. Like all the protocols need to be open. Everything we do is there. But then the line in the sand that we drew, and we drew this line, 9.5 years ago, was to say the commercial products are going to have features around security, authentication, monitoring, tuning, scaling, metrics, collaboration. Those are the kinds of things that we're going to put into the commercial side of the house. And those are the things that our IT team are going to care about on the other side. And they're like, I am willing to pay for that, right? Sure. And I want to have a single throat to choke, which is perfectly reasonable.
Right, yeah.
And so that's been the game that we've been running, which is, like I said, really considered old school. But we don't believe, we're a company of about 300 people now, and I don't think we can compete with like Databricks and AWS SageMaker and whatnot. It's sort of running a service for people. Like that just doesn't make any sense to me. So our goal is to just make those products work really well in whatever environment you want to run them into, whether you want to run them in the cloud, whether you want to run them behind your firewalls, inside of Luxembourg or whatever. Like I don't care.
Outstanding. Any views on patents, software patents, vis-a-vis open source and VC money?
I think they're completely unenforceable in the U.S. I mean, it's sort of a waste of time. Europe, I don't know well enough to say, but at the end of the day, why do we make this software? It's to solve someone's need, and maybe not even totally solve it, but reduce the pain that somebody's feeling when they're trying to run their business.
Yeah.
And so I think as a company that is using open source in its tooling, I think you find how you can combine these things to solve the business needs that people have out there. And for me, I don't think patents really.
Yeah. So I think you're asking about patents. I think Tareef shifted the question to what do you hold back from open source? And
Sure.
that's, I think,
That's
the question I think
that's
that
a
you're
good transition.
patents don't exist. I've never actually thought about a software patent.
okay.
But I think that what do you hold back? I think Tareef's answer is actually pretty common, which is that the stuff that the data scientist, the data engineer, the end user uses, that's all free and open. And the stuff that you're selling to is more like the IT department or their managers or the management groups.
Yeah.
And they're used to paying for things.
Yeah.
That provides a very nice split that the open source community is cool with because they can walk off of your platform, still use all of their analytics in a way that they're very happy with. But the IT department is also cool with because they want someone that they can choke. So that's worked out for lots of companies. It's a really common pattern. It's a common trope today. You take an open source package, figure out what IT wants, you make a company around that product.
Yeah.
And I think we can't underestimate, you have all these open source packages. The ability to make them work together
Absolutely.
There's a lot of value in that, and people will pay for that.
Yeah, our company is entirely about open source integration. And it really is a matter of personal networking because when you get to that last mile issue, you have to know who to talk with or spend 2 months finding out who that person is. In terms of enterprise costs, you can't afford the latter. I think integration is a harder issue than really it's being considered.
Very hard.
The thing about patents, the reason I was going off about that, in Europe, it's a lot less expensive to file patents. Once you do file, you start to get disclosure about who else is in this space. So it's desirable to at least make the filing to figure out who the potential competitors are. And then you can choose not to enforce it. But if anybody else comes along trying to patent it, you've already pulled the rug out from underneath them. So it's kind of a preemptive strike, and you get extra information. It's a very different view of the world in the US.
I feel like if you're getting your information from the patent office, you're not doing enough market research.
Well, USPTO, I would agree, and I have friends out there, but in Europe, I would disagree on that. So, other questions? Okay, we have a pretty broad topic as far as capitalism meets open source. What are the biggest challenges that you're facing currently? Can we go down the list about that, vis-a-vis open source versus business?
I think they're pretty aligned. I'm actually pretty happy with the alignment. There's problems, but I think the main message here is that there's not always a tension. Sometimes it's actually really beneficial.
I do think life has gotten a lot easier in the last 2 to 3 years. I think 8 years ago, I was having to explain a lot more about why this mattered and why you needed to invest and why Matt started 3 years ago now for you, 2 years?
The company was 2.5, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, life has gotten better,
Yeah.
I think, lately. Even the cloud providers have actually become a little bit more sensitive to the fact that, they can't just, destroy all these companies if they want to benefit long term, right? You disagree?
Carol.
Not so much destroy companies. That I don't think is where I'm coming from. Is someplace totally different in that, as a woman in open source or in technology in general, we're still severely underrepresented. Mm-hmm. And do I want to bank my future on companies that haven't responded significantly enough to close that gap? So what keeps me up at night is whether or not people are being extractive of open source, whether or not they are using the tools in a way that will benefit all of society, not just the slice that pays the fiduciary duty they have to their shareholders. And so for me, it's bigger issues than just the technology. It's really, are we doing what's right for the world that we need to live in? Climate change, you name it. There's a lot of stuff out there. So I don't think it's, I think the businesses are necessary, but I'm not willing to put my future in the hands of AWS, Microsoft, Google solely.
Well, that's a really interesting thing. Is it's like tech debt, but it's the social equivalent of tech debt. It's like if we don't do this right, we're going to have to unwind it and pay it down years later at a much higher rate. Okay, we're out of time. Any final thoughts on this?
We could probably do this all day long.
So yeah.
Two drinks later, though, right?
All righty.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Paco.